So the hope is that we can prevent injuries. And throughout the next 45 minutes, we're going to look at if that's possible at all, and if we can make it more entertaining on the way of helping people stay active. Now, the more we move, the higher the risk of getting an injury from movement is. But the alternative is getting a disease on the sofa. And so the benefits by far outweigh the risks. So we need to get good at moving. And to get good at moving, we need a really good understanding of motor skill application. I wanted to start with this little girl because I do like starting my lectures with something fun around movement. Now, on the first moment we see that, we can see she's having a fabulous experience. But before she got to the skill level of being able to coordinate her body and get the right power output, she had to do a lot of work. And in the time that her parents were encouraging her to walk to her, she probably fell a couple of times. She probably had a few bumps. But because the experience those around her gave her, she was like keen to get up there and do it again. And so by this point, she's now got that inter and intramuscular contractions. She's able to coordinate her body. But not only is she able to walk, she's able to hop in the constraint of that hopscotch grid. And what I love about this video, it's not just about her achievement. She knows where she's got to go. She's got that hopscotch in front of her, and she knows that at the end of that task, she's going to get to the other side, and she's probably going to get a hug from her dad. So it's absolutely fantastic, and it's reinforcing that this is a positive experience. Now, that would be very different if, as the dad is just leaning over, he went, knees in line with toes, shoulders pulled back and down. Don't do that without a neutral spine. We need to make sure that we fix all those muscular imbalances, or do it faster. That might not give her the experience that will make her go, yay, I want to do that again, Dad, because you're so much fun. No, she's probably going to be put off. And so as we grow up, movement tends to become more serious, and we tend to lose that joy, that entertainment, that play that we have as children. So my hope today is that we can find a way of getting back that joy, that we can create experiences for our clients that they love. Now, I'm sure that you've had a great experience with movement. I'm sure you've had some awful experience too, when you go too heavy on leg day and you look like a scene from a film where you're just rolling down the stairs. Well, the important thing is this experience needs to be one that we want to repeat, because that's what's going to get people more active. And what is an experience? Well, the bottom line of an experience is it's a group of feelings, okay? It's a group of feelings. But before you get these feelings, what happens is your brain decides whether an emotion is something that is an opportunity, hey, going to go and get that sandwich, or whether it's a danger, freeze, fright, or flight. So the action that it takes to the emotion is what reinforces the feeling. And that's really important the more we learn about pain, anxiety, because we can create a pain loop cycle if we're reinforcing that something is dangerous, because those groups of feelings become an experience. So where do you get an emotion from? Well, when something becomes important enough, so in this case, when Dad went, come on, we're going to go and play hopscotch, and we're like, yes, perfect. So at that moment, what we get is a trigger. Something has become important enough to us. We get triggers all the time. You might be thinking now, oh, it's hot, or it's cold, or maybe somebody's farted, or something like that. You know, oh, that's not great. And at that point, you get this what moment, and you get a chemical reaction, a muscle contraction, and there we go, bang, you're in emotion, emoting you to move either to the Starbucks coffee or to the food or whatever opportunity it is. And so as trainers, as therapists, we want to make sure that that experience is one that people want to repeat when it comes to movement. So what we don't want to be doing is scaring them to death about being injured or in pain. So I thought, right, okay, right from the start, let's look at what are the most common injuries in the gym. I'm wondering if you can guess what they are. Tripping up your own weights. So a good idea straight from the start is check the environment that you're in. Check the environment that you're in and make sure that you haven't got weights on the floor. The other one is trapping your fingers between weights. And this is something that my daughter discovered the first time she went to the gym with her boyfriend, as she trapped his finger in the weight and they ended up in A&E and he'd broken his finger. A lot of injuries occur because we're unlucky. And so we don't have the ability to take on an external force or energy. So a bit like if a bus or a cow dropped out of the sky, you're probably going to get injured if you're underneath it, because you're not going to have the force to be able to stop that. So rather than training to take on the bus or take the punch, train to get out of the way and dodge and be agile. So work on your motor skills so that if somebody has put a weight down, left it there, and you go, oh, you can manage to just step over that weight. If you are unlucky and you do get your finger trapped, or like my son, 2 girls knock you over and you dislocate your knee, you're probably going to get a bit of pain. But we need to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to pain. And so, although you can have pain with an injury, pain and an injury are 2 separate things. Pain can lead to injury, and injury can lead to pain, but they're different. And this is really important. So pain can be perceived as a warning of potential damage, but can also be present when no actual harm is being done to the body. And that was taken from the British Pain Society, which I have to say is an awesome site if anybody wants to help their clients explaining pain. What I love about that, it also explains that pain can be acute, and we're not talking like a nice little pussycat. What we're talking about is that sharp pain when you step on a nail. But after 12 weeks, it becomes chronic pain. And so with that, it's really important that we know that you can have that without any potential damage whatsoever. And I will say right away, if your client has any form of unexplained pain, unless you are a medical doctor, it's none of your business. Okay, and that is really, really important, because we could miss a disease, and actually getting somebody out of pain isn't that difficult. And if we get them out of pain and we stop them getting early treatment for cancer, that's not very smart. So I want to make sure that we do that. But this has become a bit of a heavy lecture now. And last thing I want you to do is to get injured by sitting, because we now know that that's just the most awful thing we can do. It's up there with smoking. Dreadful, dreadful. It's not that bad, honestly. So what sort of other injuries have we got? And I had to leave this one in. This makes me laugh. Can you look at this diagram? This was AI's version of illustrating injuries. The spelling's all wrong. In fact, if I saw someone running like that, I'd be going, I'm glad you're running. That's awesome. I'm hoping that you might stand up a bit straighter, because then you'd be a bit more efficient. But if I did say, great job for running, the person would probably go, well, thank you very much, and stand up naturally anyway. I love that there are so many different blobs of pain there, because it's just like the scroll of doom on Instagram, where you go, oh yes, text neck, oh dangerous, pain in your back, all of these things that are creating a story that create and add fear. So we've already looked at moving weights out of the way, trying to reduce the risk of those unlucky injuries. So the other things that we're really looking at are things like strains, broken bones, or muscle tears, skin lesions. A lot of the injuries that occur through sport, through fitness, through moving are too much volume too soon, or not having the skill to be able to move in that environment or with the load. So it comes back down to, do you have the motor skill and the muscle adaptation to handle the force, the load, or the speed? So we can do something about that, right? That's my hope. Did you notice that in the title it said injury prevention, but I never actually specified which injury? So if you do come up with some form of technique or method that you want to sell, that's quite a good way of doing it. Make it as vague as possible, then it's hard to look at the research. But when we do look at the research around children playing and moving, what we find and what we discover is that the more they specialize earlier in life, the more prone they are to those overuse types of injuries. Your shin splints, your tendonitis, your plantar fasciitis, all those sorts of things, because of the volume and because you're repeating the same movements. Whereas those children that did all sorts of different sports, so they were doing soccer, they were doing tennis, they were doing pickleball, whatever it is, they start to have less injuries because of the variety of the movement. And that variety is motor skill. So they're getting the skills and they're then putting them in different environments with different tasks. The great thing about a football game is you've got some constraints. It's not just a free-for-all, there's a ball, go and run after it. You need to get that ball between the two nets. Now, I know you know that, but we've also got the pitch. So we've got to navigate around the pitch. We know that the task is get the ball in the goal as many times as possible. And each child, each adult brings with them their own body, their own brain, which has a story, which has context, which has experiences, and it works as a dynamic system with every other person around them in that environment and in that task. And it's the same with our athletes, with our clients. So motor skill application is that combination of the body, the bones, the fascia, the brain, and the task at hand and the environment. And I stress that because of the amount of times we can see an oversimplification of movement where everything is based purely on a biomechanical laws of physics model. And that's great, but it's like explaining everything in a car on the tread of the tire and saying how the car will drive when you haven't switched the engine on and you haven't put the driver in the car who's got to get to hospital because their wife's about to give birth and all the roads are closed. So we haven't got context. We haven't got the brain. We haven't got the biomechanics all working together as a team, which we have when we work on motor skill application. So this here is my client, Toby. Toby is a tennis player and he's a really good tennis player. And so when I was training with him, I was like, right, what is it that you want to work on? Before we can think about injury prevention, that's not a goal. We want to think about what is the goal of the client? What do they want to be able to get good at? What inspires them to move? So the inspiration for him is he wants to win. So I'm like, well, why aren't you winning? He's like, I do win most of them because he's 17. He says he's brilliant. So we did discover that he fatigues on his serve. And by the end of a competition, he's losing his accuracy. So it comes down to his energy systems. And so when I'm training him, I need to make sure that the tasks I give him within that session match and will get him to that desired outcome goal. So it has to be meaningful to him. It has to make sense. And it has to be within the parameters of his sport. So this helps me select the right exercise at the right time. So using the skill of biomechanics to make sure that I'm getting the sequencing for tennis. I want to make sure that I'm getting that rib cage away from that pelvis at pace to get that power. And I also want to make sure that he's in the right kind of environment. And this was really good for Toby because he went to a competition and they had really poor courts, and he got all, we call it snobby in the UK. He's like, oh, the courts are really awful. So what we did on the next session is I took him to a local park, which was really bad, and there are holes in the courts, just to get him used to these different kinds of environments. So when we're thinking about how we put our program together for our client, I wasn't thinking, oh, I can prevent some unknown injury. What I was thinking was, what are the things that he needs to be good at? And would it be good for him to have the skills to be able to decelerate his body at pace? Hell yeah. So I want to make sure that I'm putting the challenges that he's going to need in his sport in those sessions, with the hope that I can get his skill so good that he gets that muscle adaptation, we can remove bad luck, and he can go for it. Now, I started off at a drama school, which was also a dance school. I wasn't very good at dance. And to be honest with you, they put me off a little bit because it was all about, had to be in this perfect position. But it did teach me about posture. And not just the posture of a dancer, because let's face it, you have to have upright posture as a dancer, because nobody wants to watch you if you're slouched down like this, unless it's a dance about somebody who has got a hunchback. Let's just say the Hunchback of Notre Dame. But in acting, posture was different, because posture was about showing the character's mood. If that person needed to be confident, they needed to be more upright. If they were nervous, they wanted to show this by being more covered and down. Whereas in the fitness industry, we might say this is bad and we need to work on this posture to get them upright, because some research studies showed there was a correlation between posture and pain. But it's important to know that a causation is different to correlation. Correlation is I could be eating ice cream and I'd be more likely to die of a shark attack. That's correlation. So it doesn't mean that eating ice cream causes me to die a death of being eaten by sharks. So here I have it. I'm sure all of you do a movement assessment with your clients. But before you get anywhere near the movement assessment, the moment your client walks through the door, you're reading their posture, because their posture tells you how much sleep they've had. Their posture tells you the mood they're in, and their body is carrying themselves the best it can according to that mood. And all of us want to make sure that we do the very best we can to help prevent any form of injury. And that's why when I started, I took what I'd learned about posture, signed up for my first personal training course, and I learned about biomechanics. So I learned how to see and predict movement. And I would be going around everywhere looking, oh gosh, look, their knee's gone in there, just like Elvis Presley. And then I'd be thinking, I wonder why that is. Could it be a metatarsal that's inverting at pace, or maybe it's a big eversion in the ankle due to that locked metatarsal, or it could be the tibia internally rotating, or maybe it's the shape of the tibia, could be the knee, it could be knee tracking, or maybe that they've had some sort of injury, and because of an inversion ankle sprain, their knee shot in, or maybe it's the hip that's sticking, or maybe the opposite hip is rotating, or maybe that opposite foot is pulling back. It could be any one of those things, or maybe just because of their sport, their motor skill learning that they've had, they're really rapid at turning in that. Maybe they just dance a lot to Elvis Presley, or there was a good looking chap just in the corner. It could be any one of those things, but I would be focusing on that adductor and strength training on the glutes. Whereas now I'm thinking, there are a lot of other things it could be. We pride ourselves on trainers to make a unique experience for our clients, and quite right. There's nothing more annoying than a trainer churning out the same old program day after day for every single client. Yet a lot of the movement assessments seem to be the same. Back then, I started off with measuring joint motion on a bed using a diameter. Threw that out of the way because maybe I can't even see the numbers now, and I don't think an ASM have it anymore. But there's lots of different movement screens, your FMS, all of those sorts of things. And then I moved on to getting obsessed by muscular balances. So I would be there going, right, I need to fix that because this muscle's here and they've got scoliosis. So I've got to rebuild this person and I've got to fix them. And I started to realize that the language that was creeping into my training sessions was becoming more like a lecture than something that I'd actually want to go and do. I was like, oh yes, that's tight. And, well, actually, if you've got a tight hamstring, that's probably a good thing if you're a runner, because it means that it will stop you from falling on the floor without you getting too close to the floor. So sometimes those things are actually really good as part of that skill. But back then I was like, yes, I've got to make everybody symmetrical. And one of the things you may not know about me is I love symmetry. So for me, this worked very, very well. If I've got mess, I like mess here and I like mess there. I love a bit of symmetry. So that was beautiful. And if you are working with a bikini model, it's an essential skill to have, to know that you can select the right exercise and balance someone up, because they're going to get marked down if they've got a left butt cheek that is smaller than the right. So if they've been squatting and they're constantly going into their left butt cheek and they're rotating in, might be, oh dear. So what we might want to do now is work with that biomechanics and make sure that we get more loading on that right. So we might want to take the arm up and reach a target to the side so they're getting more from that right glute. Better still, the glute loves to work on its own, so get them off onto one leg. I then got involved in hands-on. Don't know if you've ever done any of this, but I love this. You could spot a faster trainer back in about 2009. We were all on the floor, hands-on, and it was great. It was great. Not so great when I got to the research, but hey-ho, we did what we could at that time. I then did a fascial release course, and this was the point where I had been following guru after guru. And on this particular course, I was like blown away. I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm buying my scraping tool. But I didn't wait for the scraping tool, because they said you could actually use a spoon or your ring. And so I used my ring on a client on his meniscus, and I used my spoon. So I had a client who was in my kitchen and she couldn't get her arm up here. And we'd had it diagnosed, so I knew what it was, but I got my spoon out and I'm like, I've got something that I can think help. And all of a sudden her arm shot up here and I was like, wow. And she just thought this was fantastic. And so she told everybody else that I was this guru that could fix shoulders and fix knees. And all of a sudden I was with a waiting list and I was spooning everybody in Wimbledon. And I could hardly get my head out of the door because I felt like such a guru. I was like Jesus Groves and loved it. And as I went for my next run, I started to develop pain underneath my foot. And I'm like, that's annoying. That's annoying. And so I got a bit of scraping on that fascia underneath, but it was still hurting. And I'm like, this is slightly confusing, because I've been doing everything that I've been told to do, and I'm doing everything that I'm doing with my clients. And what I noticed about the scraping on my foot and on my client, Julia, was that she got the range in the session, and then 2 days later, it had gone again. And that was the same with my foot. It would relieve the pain temporarily, but then it came back. And not only that, it was coming back sharper. And I was strong, stronger than I would have ever been, had a six-pack and everything. I was doing my myofascial release. I was foam rolling every day. And then I went out, and this time I had a super sharp pain on my knee. And I knew this was something even more serious. And I knew I need to do something different. And it was at that point when John Hardy from Faster Health and Fitness emailed me and said, you know, the last course you did with us, we've had to rewrite it because we were wrong about many things. And at first I thought, oh, here we go. That's another $2,500 down the drain. But he reminded me that any course that you do at Faster, you get to do again for free and you don't have to pay. You can come back as many times as you like. Now, you'd think that was good. But what I didn't like was he told me that after 15 years of being in the fitness industry, I shouldn't be trusting and following gurus anymore. What I should do is get the tools to be able to question what I was doing and make sure that I was doing the best thing I could for my clients. And in this case, me with my meniscus injury. So the Faster process starts with all courses, whichever ones you do, the Faster process is the same. And the first thing is, can you help? And the reason I'm mentioning that is because this is where we determine what the outcome goal is, what the movement goal is for the client, not what their hurdles are, not the pain that they've had diagnosed or the injury that they potentially come with, what their movement goal is. If weight loss is on the cards, what would they be doing differently if weight wasn't an issue? So getting deep underneath that, and that takes a lot more time than we've got today. The next golden nugget was the research, but this was my sticking point because I'm an actress and we did not have to evaluate research on my degree. We just dressed up in different outfits and went on the street. So that sounds very wrong when I put it like that. Not on the streets, But anyway, so research. We haven't got a lot of time to go through everything on that, but I do want to cover it. Once you've done the necessary research, you can then go to your measurements, to your assessments. And from this point, what we really want to know is how good that client is. What's their skill level like? And how does that compare to what their performance goal is, the outcome that they want? Because then that gives us everything that we need, knowing everything about the client, what they like, what they don't like. We can choose the right exercise, the biomechanics, to make sure they feel the way they want to feel 3 days after your session. And that might be somebody who's had sciatica doesn't want to feel their right butt cheek. So we want to make sure that when they're squatting, we're adding a rotation. So they're actually getting external rotation in that right hip, and they're not going to be getting that glute as well as they would be if they were going into internal rotation, adduction, and flexion. So we select the exercise based on the feeling we want the client to have 3 days later. And then we need to know that they can do the thing as often until they get the right adaptation. So that intensity, the energy systems. And that, incidentally, is everything about how the client feels in the session. So from there, we would look at making that program. But I had to look at the research. And that was the bit that I was really, really struggling with, because there's so much research out there. And how do you know which is a good study and which isn't a good study if you want to actually, have a life and still watch Netflix? And so a quick word about research. Everything is research. Everything is evidence-based. So we have to be really careful of the fallacies out there. If anybody wants to sell a product or a method, they're going to start off with it's evidence-based or science. Science isn't a person, it's a process, and it keeps testing. And if it thought it knew everything, it would just stop. So knowing that everything comes from an opinion, even an opinion that has been tested through the rigor of science. What we need to know is, how do we get to a higher level of research? Or how do we check that we haven't fallen for fallacies like, well, according to my clinical experience, or according to a very good doctor friend of mine, call to authority. We don't need to fall for that old chestnut. And I don't want you to trust me. So this talk is not about what you should do with your clients. My hope in this talk is that you think, oh, that's interesting. I would like to go and look at the research on this myself, particularly if you've always done something, a technique or a method, but you know that you haven't actually looked at the research studies. You haven't actually gone to PubMed and read those articles or worked out, was that study on a correlation, and are you happy to work from a point of correlation? And so I think research is a bit pants. That's an English word. It kind of means knickers. So I'm not talking about long john trousers. I'm talking about pants. And in my pants, all the information goes in. Okay, but we can't hold on to everything. So I have to go through a very, very quick check system, just like the brain does when it's assessing if an experience is one that it wants to repeat or not. So I go to the studies and I have a look at, is the author relevant to what they're talking about? So when I was looking at studies around collision in rugby, the author was actually a doctor of sexually transmitted diseases. So I'm not sure what that had to do with concussion, but I did find out it was because her son got concussed. And so there was a bias within there. So we just need to be mindful of that. Study size, it needs to be on large numbers of people. Funding. So if it is a paper that has been put together by someone who's selling some form of product, yeah, there's a bias within that. The data publish. So it needs to be quite relevant. And the impact factor, so without going into too much detail, an impact factor of about 3 is pretty good in the fitness industry. So that's where I put my level on, but it's not the be all and end all. There's lots of different factors. But once you have this, what you can do is you can go, well, I'm going to read the studies that maybe agree with me, but then also make sure you read the studies that don't agree with you at all. You check their value. And if they make your criteria, regardless of what it says, they stay in the crotch of my pants. So that becomes the balance of best academic studies. And it means that anybody can be turned into a non-academic sports scientist. It's quite easy. The difficult part is getting the right question. So I went in at first and I was asking which were the best stretches or foam rolling exercises for a meniscus tear. So my bias was in the question. What I really needed to find out was, were there any exercises that I needed to avoid with a meniscus tear? I just thought it was really important to do that because a lot of studies out there can be very misleading, and I've become very fearful in the past about neutral spine. Turns out that study by Stuart McGill was done on pigs, and they got little pigs and they smashed their spines 86,432 times. That was on animals, it was on pigs. And there were other studies that saying, why aren't we lifting in according to evidence? And that said, we could lift any way we like as long as we have that skill to be able to do it. It seems that definitely too much too soon is a big indicator for any form of injury. So now I have this, I've got some tools to go and think about. Turns out the spine that I showed you was Usain Bolt, and I did put that in one of our groups a couple of weeks ago. And it's amazing how many people that I said, oh, the client has no pain and they want to run. And based on the spine, I got lots of comments back of I would sort out their muscular imbalance, definitely don't let them run, and definitely don't let them weightlift. I think Bolt is pretty quick as it goes, but I would have bolted a mile if I had to take on someone with that spine many years ago. When it comes to tight muscles, once again, this isn't an indicator of pain or damage. We know that. If we change the perception of a length of muscle or a tight muscle, that's what we're doing. we're actually working with the central nervous system to change that perception. And I think we're doing all right on time. If you want to just take your hands and just drop down as far as you can go until you feel that restriction, and then just roll that back up again. I hope you're doing this with me. Now what I want you to do is to grab your finger and take it into your rib cage and poke it in. Give it a little turn. Poke it in so you feel that wince. Okay, now what you need to do is you need to go back down and do that again. Well, I can't help but smile because I still got a chemical reaction, a what moment, muscle contraction, hormones, got an emotion, and with that action I'm reinforced because I went at least four fingers down even lower by doing that. But that was short term. And so if we can replace time that is spent static with movements, we can reinforce the motor skill, we can reinforce strength and self-efficacy. Weak muscles, I couldn't find anything to say that weak muscles was a predictor of injury. It would seem that you need to get pretty up close to an injury to be able to predict it. If you step on a rake and it smacks you in the face, you're probably going to know about that pretty quickly. Now, women's football. We know that there's a lot of research out there to say that women will get more ACL injuries. That's particularly in our competitive games. So it's more when they're in competition. Now, part of that has been put down to biomechanics, the QL angle, so the pelvis in line with that femur. However, on digging in a little bit deeper, it seems there could be a lot more to it. So they want to do a lot more research on social environment. Women still don't get the same amount of time on a ball from an early age where they develop their motor skills and their adaptation to their tissue tolerance. So there's a lot more to it than just the biomechanics. And also, as far as we're concerned as personal trainers, movement therapists, we can't change their limb lengths. So what we have to work with is how do we make them more skillful and try and avoid those injuries. It turns out that if you've had a hamstring tear and you've not had it rehabbed properly, that can be an indicator for an ACL injury too. So make sure that we are doing our rehab properly and then gradually building it back up. And I would also say that with that, maybe we need to work harder at getting our females to work at an intense competitive level as close as possible to game match environment, because that seems to be what's slipping. So we need to make sure that we're constantly balancing up the risks versus reward. And if you're going to start to walk on a tightrope, make sure you start low before you go for walking across the Grand Canyon. Build up your skills. Our biomechanic skills, our eyes to see and predict movement are still absolutely essential. But now it's less about fixing a movement, but more about, am I seeing the right sequence to happen? So if I've got a golf player, I want to make sure their shoulders are going to go before their hips. Here with a football kick, I could use that ball as a target, go kick it over there in the net, and I'm looking for that rib cage to come away from that pelvis at pace. We need to manage our clients and help them with volume. So we're managing those risks. Volume, we're really thinking about our sets and reps here. We want to make sure that we're getting enough rest and recovery. Lots and lots about that at the moment. You may also want to be thinking about your clients' sleep hygiene and their diet. Now, for me, I refer out when it comes to diet. If they've got any medical conditions, that's where the process of research comes in super handy, because as soon as you know that they've had a previous injury or have any medical conditions, you can work on your questions and get to the best level of evidence, always putting your client and their experience first. So just to recap, so far, injury prevention is more about reducing the risks, managing the risks. Try not to get unlucky. And also, if you're the person that likes to pile your plate up when you're in a buffet, you may need to be careful on the weight rack. Don't let your eyes become bigger than your muscles. All right, so not too much too soon on that volume. Now, the other one that we haven't addressed here today yet is previous injury. And you are 50% more likely to re-injure a previous injury. And that actually means that if you do a PARQ questionnaire, you're already got a better prediction of if someone's going to get an injury or not than any movement screen. So our movement screens really should be more about our clients' movement ability and how to program. We go into that more on motor. This is Karen, and she is a faster trainer expert. And she's here to remind us that words matter. When Karen came to me, first of all, it was about 8 years ago, and she had chronic pain. She ran a Pilates studio, and she really struggled to move. And she was diagnosed with osteoporosis. So the first thing I was able to do was to go and check the research and discover that she didn't need to be experiencing that pain, but everything was ruled out. So then we started with, what did she want to do? What was important to her? She wanted to do back bends, boxing, and running. She was told by her osteopath that one, he was putting her SI joint back in place every 4 to 5 weeks, doing that for 5 years. Thank you very much. She was also told she should never run again. Our words matter. What was happening is she was going to see him, and he was putting her in this pain loop cycle where she believed she was being fixed from biomechanics, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, if she went outside and it was maybe cold or something like that, and she got that trigger of that feeling, that emotion, her brain interacted and went, oh, this could be dangerous. I'm going to pile on a lot of pain. And it was debilitating for her. She was told that she couldn't sleep without a certain pillow, all sorts of different things. In this particular clip, what we were doing is using the hopscotch as a task she had to get across. We started off allowing her to use whichever foot she wanted. Then I specified that she had to use the left foot only. And the reason for that is we were actually working on her power sequencing for boxing, and she's left-handed. So I wanted to make sure that she got the power from that left foot. So straight after this, we went onto the pads and had a cracking session. She absolutely smashed it. So we talked about an experience, and that's what it is here in a little cartoon form. So we have this bang, okay? This is that point where all the sensors around us are constantly giving us information, and then boom, it becomes super important, and we get that emotional reaction, that muscle contraction, that hormone change. And then we've got, whoa, about 6 seconds, and super fast, the brain goes through so many different choices. Is this an opportunity? What's Joe going to do to me here? In context, would this be a good thing? Some people like pain in a good context, but we're not going to go there. Some people might go, oh, that's awful. Whatever it is, and it's going through this checklist. How did you sleep? What did somebody else say about you? What have doctors said to you in the past? What have your parents said to you before? What did your family members die of? All of these stories are in your head, and within 6 seconds, it goes through this checklist, and then it will make the action to reinforce either this is danger or this is an opportunity. And I wanted to make sure that I was reinforcing for Karen that she was awesome, that she was strong, that she was capable, rather than reinforcing that her SI joint was slipping off like a dinner plate at a table. These feelings that she created changed that experience. And my hope and my passion is getting more people to have the tools to be able to create these experiences that our clients love. To start off with, we need to make sure that we're defining what success looks like for our client. And that's really them defining what success looks like to them. It's their goal, and we need to know, what does good look like? What's your best performance? Form is important, but is it important that we all have a one-size-fits-all, the same movement? Or if we can be successful, complete the task without experiencing pain, surely that's a good thing. So here the task is putting the ball onto the cone, and this is a client of Peter, who's a faster trainer expert, and his client is post a motorbike accident. So he's placed a bag underneath the foot to help his foot stabilize, and he's putting those balls onto the cones. If they fall, it wasn't successful. Here, the task is to get from one side of the cones to the other, a bit like Twister. That was successful. So first of all, we define what success looks like. Then we use targets, constraints, to make sure that we're getting the sequencing and the right power at the right time. So that might be for a powerlifting lift. It might be that you want to get someone to start off by breaking the movement down to what they're capable of doing, or then you might want to use different instructions or targets like the weight or a positioning, but not thinking about an actual not thinking about an actual anatomical coaching cue, but a way of using a task. So if you were deadlifting, for instance, it might be just pick up the bar to your top of your pants so that you pull that bar up with power. For my golfer here, it was about making sure that the shoulders went before the hips. Three, make the targets important. So whatever that target is, it's got to have value to it. Whether that is, I want you to put your foot on this particular cone here, or whether it's about you've got to hit 5 of these cones in a certain amount of time. And then if you want to play with cognition, you might think about using different coloured cones and ask them to repeat that task as quickly as possible without reminding them of the task colours that they were going for. This is Dan, and he's a cricketer. So we're making those targets important to him because I want to make sure that he can hit and bat as many different positions as possible. So what I'm using is the faster hub, and on the faster hub it's got different points of targets. So there's numbers, there's little triangles, and we can make sure that if we want to get, for example, more glute on a movement, we could just turn the toe in to the dot of the target whilst reaching the hand over to the number 3. And as we drop, that's going to get more internal rotation at the hip. So making those targets important. And this is key. We want our clients to be able to self-organize. So we're giving targets, and it might be, right, I've got this cone and I'm going to put it onto the floor And what I want you to do is I want you to lunge to the cone. Now, if you do a forward roll and you touch the cone, you were successful, but it wasn't really what I had in mind. So I'm going to say, well, what I want you to do now is I want you to bring the leg back. You're going to step one leg forward, keeping the other leg here. And then I want you to reach with your hand to the cone. And that way the body can self-organize and get there and touch that cone. If you're finding that the person is struggling with that, then you can change the targets. I found that when I was doing my first boxing match, I was struggling to get the sequencing of my hip following through from my hand. So what I did was I put the little cone behind my foot, and every time before I punched on the bag, I had to use my foot and just knock over that cone. So I was getting that rotation, that power from the foot out through that arm. So getting that rib cage away from the pelvis, but making sure the sequencing was in the right order.
Run.
Once you become successful at the movement, then what we need to do is we need to change the variables. So if you got really good at doing a football kick in one place, you're going to get better and better at that thing until you don't get better at football. And so then we need to put the football kick into as many different places as possible. That's really important when we think about lifting as well, because if you're doing a competition lift, a competitive lift, it needs to look like a certain way because of that competition. But if you're a mum and you need to pick up your child, you might be able to pick up your child in a very strict competitive manner, or you might need to pick them up from the side or late at night in a cot, balancing on one leg, trying to twist and rotate round. So we need to be able to make sure that client is able to lift items from very different positions. So it's not about a one size form, but it's about giving them the experience to move in as many different ways as possible and know that they are successful, that they are strong, that they can do this. This is Anna, and she rated her right leg against her left leg. As you can see, she's incredibly good at a one-legged squat. But what we discovered was that she preferred her left leg when it came to power out of that movement. And so what we did is we took the right leg and we started off. The task was she had to drop down and then power out of that movement. And she's going to the first number straight ahead of the hub. That was the number 2. And once she mastered that, it's like, okay, now let's see if you can do it to the numbers on the corners, the 1 and the 3, or round to the side, the 4 and 5, or even harder, all the way round that corner. When she did do that, she came back to comparing her left with her right, and now her right started to feel better than her left because we'd worked on the skill. But the important part here is it's always about your client's goal, what they want to achieve. This is my group, and we went and did a Tough Mudder. What I love about a Tough Mudder is you have to get over all of these different obstacles, but there's no one right way of getting an over the obstacle. It gives you that feedback. You've either got your face planted in mud or you got over the obstacle. Sometimes you might go and you've got to go over a balance beam and it could be super easy, but another time you might do it and the environment might have changed and it may be muddy and you slip and it all goes to pot. And that's part of the fun, finding your best movement. But again, trying to think, can we take away any unnecessary risks? This is my client, Angela. And Angela had a frozen shoulder and everything had got a lot better. We'd been working on her strength. She was becoming much more confident. And she got this injury at the same time as when she lost her husband. And so it was quite emotional. And she decided that she really wanted to do this Tough Mudder. And of course, I would say at every obstacle, you know, are you okay with this? Do you want to do this one? And she's like, yes, I want to do this one. I want to do this one. So she's running into the half pipe and she reached up and she fell all the way back down. And she's like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it again. And she's only a little thing. So she ran straight in again and goes up. And this guy grabs her hand. And there's me. And I am trying to get in pretty much to pick her up by her bra straps to pull her up there. She did it. She was absolutely fine. She loved it. She was so pleased with herself. And I got this photo come through on my phone that night. And I thought, I can't show her, because if I show her that picture, it could flip the story. And she could wake up the next day with DOMS and think, oh my gosh, that is pain, that is injury, and I've done it all over again. And that's not the story I wanted her to have. So I kept the photograph back. But then after a week, when I knew she was saying she'd had such a ball and loved it, I showed her the photo and showed her how strong she'd become and that range. Right, we've got to get through to the end here. I will be just one moment. This is Liz. She's probably my only client that has the power as well as the skill to be able to lift this weight. I had a luxury of training her before she went into the powerlifting champions. She's got her own powerlifting champion coach, but I went in to help her with a bit of skill development, and she is fantastic. But before she starts, we do have to shout at her a little bit to get her into that zone. This morning,
so yesterday I had a bit of a fall. You can see here. It's very, very painful. So I ended up on my run trying to find out where I was going. I ended up on the beach, which is lovely, but it's got a boardwalk. And I didn't really negotiate the sand. It was very slippery under my foot, and I just kind of went down. This guy came rushing out this hut to help me, but I literally went down and sprung straight out, went, no, fine. I did a mini Joe Groves and I ran off into the distance. But I really thought about it after, and I thought all that work we'd done, the different directional lunges, where you got me to push away from the floor and then doing it with Viper, I think it saved me. So thank you for that. Now, in this part this morning,
we're running out of time. There is so much more that I would love to get through. This is Jay. He had an ACL injury and a meniscus tear. And when he finished and got cleared by his physical therapist, he wanted to get back to football. And at that point, he was able to squat without discomfort, but I needed to get him back into a position where he could twist and rotate on his knee. So what we did is we took him to a wall and we started to get him to turn safely. So mitigating those wrists and touch that wall. And then gradually we started to get him to hop and turn and rotate, touching the wall. And as he built his confidence and his power with that movement, gradually took him away from that wall and then took him back to the grass, changing the environment as he's built his confidence up to his new movements. He then wanted to run a marathon, so he had to work on a different thing altogether. Think of pace. So a quick review there. The most important thing is your client's goal, trying to get them to their outcome. Motor skill application specialist is going to be something that really helps you deliver a session that's going to get your clients skillful and the adaptation they need in a way that reduces fear. It's important to mitigate the risks, watch the volume, the intensity, the load, and the recovery. But hopefully, most of all, make it fun, make it entertaining. This is Jay. Sorry, no, it's not. It's Raf. Raf's got polio and MS, and he needed to be able to make sure that if his kids did leave Lego out, he could roll on the floor and fall safely as possible. He's pretty competitive because he's a maths tutor as well. So there's a lot that's gone into that, and we could really just spend another hour talking about it, but I'd really love to hear some of your questions. And I hope that although I haven't delivered a foolproof injury prevention, because I don't have a crystal ball, my hope is that we can take away fear and we can entertain our clients to better movement. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joanne. I'm going to switch over here for just a moment, and we're going to do a couple of promos for our in-house stuff. We got our next webinar coming up in September 24th. That's Tuesday, September 24th at 10 p.m. Pacific time. It's Enhancing the Muscle-Brain Connection, the Science Behind Training Techniques for MS with Caroline and David Lyons. You can sign up for this or any of our other future webinars by going to medfitclassroom.org. Find the menu at the top that says Online Education, drag that down to the submenu that says 2024 webinars, and see what's upcoming and sign up for this one or any others. All of our past webinars are available at medfittv.org, which is available as either an annual or a monthly subscription. And it is also included with your MedFit Network membership, which is a directory of medically educated fitness professionals who are able to deliver fitness training and instruction and coaching in the context of one or more medical conditions. So you get in here and people will find you because they're doing a search locally for someone that can help them. And we get pretty high search result returns for our site for those kind of searches. And lastly, I'm going to put Joanne's contact info up here for everyone. You can grab any of this information that seems relevant to you. She's got a discount there for you on any faster course. And then all of her contact info just in general through her website or her social media channels is available to you there as well. I'm going to see if we have a chance for one quick question. We kind of already 4 minutes over our stop time, but if we get a good question here quickly, I'm going to throw one to you that's maybe a quick, short one. Let's see. There's one here from Gail. Let's see. Could you explain a bit more what you were saying in the beginning about how the brain processes pain experiences and chronic pain? But be brief in the explanation. I know that's probably tricky, but.
Yeah, so I mean, it is something that we spend a whole hour at least and a module on. But when we're talking about experience, pain is a feeling, and there is a debate at the moment of whether it's an experience from the brain, but I would say that it's a whole body experience that the brain filters and shares. So it's sharing on its whole body experience and context, but it's important to know that it is a feeling, and we can reinforce it as a danger or reinforce as a positive. And obviously when it comes to movement, if it has been cleared and there's nothing dangerous, if you've got pain, move in a way that doesn't trigger that pain.
Right. Yeah, people, I think pain it's really information, right? So then the brain decides what to do with it. You know, so yeah, it's complex, but I think it's only complex when we try to analyze it and come up with an abstract concept to explain pain. You don't need to really go that deeply to understand it. But if you want to kind of break it down, it gets a little more complicated. Well, Gail, I hope that answer was helpful for you.
I think the really important thing is that you can have pain with no damage, and the brain will see the story, but the story is also from the environment it's been in and context.
Yeah, I find a lot of people are scared of getting injured in exercise when in reality their exercise environment is when they're going to focus the most on movement. They're more likely to be injured in their everyday life than they are at the gym, to be honest with you, because they're absentmindedly doing something. They're in a rush. They reach into the back seat. The kid's crying. They're trying to, there's just so much going on in everyday life, and they're less mindful when they're not working out typically, unless they've been coached to be more mindful. I think overall what you're saying is, even if you have someone who has serious back injuries, and they're going to be a little scared to move at first, but what we want to do is build that confidence to move a little more comfortably, but then also make it relevant so it's fun and interesting and it seems meaningful to them. So it's not just living in a fear state of movement all the time, afraid to hurt yourself. You become a little bit more comfortable with movement. You move towards it because it's now enjoyable again. And that is a process for someone who is starting from a point of significant injury. But I really like your message today, so thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your expertise. And if anyone just wants to reach out to Joanne, if you have additional questions, be sure to hit her up on any of the contact info there that matches your chosen platforms of communication and following people. And thank you, Joanne, for your time and expertise. And thank all of you in the audience for paying attention and giving us the gift of your time and attention. We'll see you again soon on another webinar, we hope, and have a great rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.